biblical humility is about lifting other people up. And the playground bully suffers from a chronic lack of humility, and a president who mangles and destroys his people for personal gain suffers from a chronic lack of humility. Because biblical humility says you lift other people up. And God judges authentic worship and authentic humility not by how we put ourselves on a sliding scale of importance, either against other people across the compassion family or against God, but how we use our resources, our power for the oppressed. I'll tell you what, this is why I am terrified and excited about the work I'm doing in Micah Challenge. Hold your seat, this is the short advert. In the year 2000, 189 governments made a promise. They said, we will look across our world and we make a promise to reduce extreme poverty by 50% by the year 2015 through 8 discrete promises called the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs. MDGs sounds a little bit like a sports car, but it's a lot more serious than that. And having made these promises, a number of us felt, well, my goodness, this is almost prophetic. For the first time in human history, our governments have put their colors to the mast, and they have made a promise to the poor. They have said, we promise to use our power in order to relinquish extreme poverty by 50% by 2015. Yes, I know it's ambitious. Yeah, I know we may not hit all the targets. But a number of us felt, what should a Christian response be to such a momentous promise? Should we say, these promises were made under the auspices of the United Nations, therefore they must be vaguely demonic. We will have none of that. Or should we say, here is a moment in human history which resonates with the prophecy of Isaiah 58. Here is a moment in human history which resonates with the 8th century prophets of Micah and Hosea. Here is a moment when we may step in the gap and say, he has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Walking humbly with God doesn't come third because it's third in importance. It comes third because it's foundational. Because the person who walks in humility with God finds it easier to do justice and finds that mercy flows from the mercy seat between the wings of the cherubims through the cross of Jesus Christ to the heart of the average believer who we sometimes call ordinary prophets. And so we have a commitment to hold governments to account because they have made promises. The great thing about Moses, you know, was that he brought precisely the same challenge to Pharaoh in his day. What caused Pharaoh not to release the people of Israel? It was hardness of heart, a radical lack of humility. And that became his undoing. You know, I often think that there is a progression between social action, which we've become quite good at, ministries of mercy, which we excel in. You are an arch example of that. And biblical advocacy. I think Moses was a great social activist. I mean, you've got to be really good and passionate about it if you're willing to kill an Egyptian in the cause of it. But there was a gap between Moses' social activism, his passion for justice at an activist level, and the moment when he stepped into Pharaoh's place and said, this is what God says, let my people go. I love the way in which David Beckman from Bread for the World has expressed that. God, he said, did not send Moses to Pharaoh's court to take up a collection of canned goods, but rather to insist on political and economic change, the liberation of the slaves. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing of the finger with malicious talk, and if you, and by the way, this is in the singular in the scriptures, spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then this passage spoke to me very powerfully over 2 or 3 years. What does it mean for Joel Edwards to pour out his soul to the oppressed? That was with me for 3 years. God, what are you saying to me? I want to challenge every single person here that this is a personal invitation. If you pour out your soul, this is more than a contribution. This is a radical commitment. And this kind of pouring out of soul is what Isaiah was profoundly committed to. And this radical humility goes beyond controlled sacrifice to inconvenient worship. I was thinking, as I was preparing a couple of days back, that it is good for me to sacrifice. I support people in parts of the world. That comes out of my account. I control it. I can stop it any time, you know. So it's one thing for me to give controlled commitments. But it's quite another thing when people come crashing in upon me and take the control away from me. When the poor come crashing in, that becomes very inconvenient. Thank you very much. This is genuine worship. This is radical humility. If you share your bread with the hungry, if you bring the poor to your house, if you see the naked and cover him, if you pour out your soul. I'm not very good at that. Honestly, I'm not. I find it very, very demanding to be inconvenienced by the poor. But if humility means anything, it means that I've got to engage with this challenge of Isaiah 58. If you pour out your... What's God saying to you today? You've been doing the job for a long time. You love the job. This is a great ministry. But is God possibly calling us to something a little more radical, a pouring out of the soul?